By this point in the course, you would have already come across numerous instances of text styling. There are two types of ways we use CSS to style text. We will talk about them in this section. We have font styles. Now, these are settings that change how the text looks, like what font is used, how big it is it bold, is it italic, stuff like that. Now, text layout styles, these are settings that change how the text is spaced and how it looks in relation to the rest of the content. For example, space between the lines and letters, and how it is aligned within the content box. A common property that you have come across before and is used is color. The color property in CSS is used to specify the color of the text. The value of the color property can be specified in several ways. It can accept any CSS color unit. Remember when we talked on color? So you have hexadecimal, you have the keywords, you have RGB, so you can use those. In our sample here, we have a simple heading and two paragraphs. We will apply a color to the paragraph. This will cause the text of the paragraph to be blue-violet. To set a different font for your text, you use the font family property. The font family property is like a list of options for the browser. The browser will look at the first option on the list and see if it's available on the user's computer. If it is, great, the browser will use that font. If not, it will move on to the next option on the list. The browser will keep on going through the options until it finds one that it can use. So for example, let's say you want to use the font Arial for your text. You will write this in your CSS. This tells the browser to use Arial font for any text inside a P element. That stands for paragraph. But what if the user doesn't have Arial installed on their computer? In that case, you can provide a list of other fonts as backup options. Like this. The browser will try to use the Arial first. If that's not available, it will try Helvetica New. And if that's not available either, finally it will use any font labeled as sans serif. Now, sans serif is a generic font in CSS. When you specify a generic font name in your CSS, the browser will first try to use a font that is installed on the user's device that matches that specific name. Now, if no font is found with that name, the browser will use a font that is similar to the specified generic name. Let me explain with an example. For example, if you specify a font family of serif, the browser will first try to use a font that is labeled as serif font on the user's device. If no such font is found, the browser will then use a font that is similar to a serif font. An example is Times New Roman or Georgia. Concerning generic fonts, it's important to know that different browsers may have different default fonts for each generic font name. For example, Chrome may default to Times New Roman for the serif font, while Firefox may default to Georgia. To ensure that your text is displayed consistently across different browsers, you should always specify multiple font families as a fallback mechanism. Now, here are the 5 generic font names you can use in CSS: serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. You can select which generic fonts you wish to look for by checking the categories section on the Google Fonts website. When you do a search, you can tick or untick boxes to streamline your search results to fonts of a specific generic font type. In our sample here, we will apply the font using the font family property. We will use the generic serif font. Now, without setting font family, the default font is already Times New Roman, which is a serif font. So setting it to serif might not cause any change. However, we can ask it to use Verdana, and if that's not available, fall back to a serif font. It's possible to ask it for fonts that are not available. So generally, you want to use web safe fonts. Now, this might be the first time you're hearing about web safe fonts. Now, web safe fonts are fonts that are commonly available on most computers and devices. So this is why they are considered safe. Now, these are some popular web safe fonts and their corresponding generic names. It's important to note that the list of web safe fonts may vary depending on the operating system and browser. Now, it's still possible that some web safe fonts might not be supported on some browsers or devices. In that case, you can use the fallback mechanism that we saw earlier by specifying multiple font families. So the browser will try to use the first one, and if it's not available, it will try the next one. When you're using multiple web safe fonts, you're sure that at least one of them will be selected. Now, aside from using web safe fonts, we can use web fonts that are hosted on servers like Google Fonts or Adobe Fonts. Now, using this is becoming more common, and we will explore using all this in coming lessons.